to the stage. Is that Dr. Kim? Yes. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Dr. Kim, Prime Minister Lee, and for our audiences in our host country of Indonesia, selamat siang, Bapak dan Ibu, hadirin sekalian yang aku hormati. My name is I have to admit, I grew up in Indonesia, so that shouldn't be that hard for me. I'm cheating a little bit. My name is Karishma Viswani. I'm the BBC's Asia Business Correspondent, and I'm also your moderator for today. It gives me a great pleasure and privilege to talk about something that is very close to my heart, the launch of the Human Capital Index and the summit, the Human Capital Summit that the World Bank has released today. Now, this event will take place in two parts. The first will be a high-level conversation between Dr. Kim and Prime Minister Lee, discussing how the changing nature of work will affect the priority and the urgency of how governments need to invest in their people. Following this discussion, we will call to stage leaders from around the world who've been inspired by the global call to action to prioritize human capital. So without further ado, let's get down to business, because I know this is what you've all come here for, the discussion between these two men. Thank you so much. Let's please join me in welcoming the World Bank's President, Dr. Jim Kim, and the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Hsien Loong. Thank you. Let me start with our hosts today, Dr. Kim. You've just released the Human Capital Index. You and I talked about it earlier today, and it's the first time that the bank has done this. But, you know, the bank has always prioritized healthcare and education, so why have you done this now? What's the reason?
Well, actually, it's not true that the bank has always prioritized health and education. You know, looking back when I first came to the bank, we looked at the history of Korean borrowing from the World Bank. And first of all, up until 1962, the bank thought that Korea was so hopeless, such a poor country, that it would never be able to pay back the loan. So it didn't qualify for World Bank borrowing until 62. And then in 68, the second loan it took, first one was for a road, the second one was for education.
Right.
And it was ridiculed for doing that, because the idea was, first you go rich, first you build the infrastructure, you get rich, and then when you have the tax revenue, then you invest in your people. And that was actually an explicit strategy at the World Bank Group. There are stories of the World Bank saying things like, health and education, you know, we're a bank, damn it. And there are quotes from leaders at the bank. And so we weren't always, and in fact, that's why in the early 90s, I was part of the movement to close the World Bank on its 50th anniversary. 50 years is enough. Because we specifically felt that there was too much focus on GDP and not enough focus on investing in people. So, you know, after 6 years of being at the bank, I just felt, I saw that the levels of childhood stunting were so high, 25% of all the children in the world. The quality of education, our World Development Report on education last year, the quality of education was just stunningly poor. And, you know, we could then tell you, compared to a year of education in Singapore, how much education were children in, say, Malawi getting, and it was less than half a year.
My goodness.
So we felt like we had to change the incentives. We had to change what we measure, and we had to, in front of every single head of state or head of government, and especially in front of ministers of finance, we had to show that just these 4 outcome indicators that we put together were extremely highly correlated to economic growth going backwards, and we could only assume that they'll be more highly correlated going forward. And the ranking was a tough decision we had to take, because frankly, governments don't like to be ranked.
Yeah.
But what I've learned from the Doing Business report is that the ranking is what really captures people's attention. And I thought that this is so urgent, that this is an emergency, that we have to take the risk and capture everyone's attention.
So, Prime Minister, Singapore does very well in the business report, but it's at the top of the list in the Human Capital Index. Congratulations, as a fellow Singaporean, that makes me very proud. Yes, that definitely deserves a round of applause. So, you look back at how Singapore first started, and back in the years of independence, nothing like how it is today. So was this a plan from the beginning? How did you do this?
Well, we got some things right at the beginning, but we can't pretend to have forecast everything from the outset. We started off in quite a difficult position. The population was poor, the housing conditions were abysmal, health was not good, tuberculosis was endemic, we had cholera epidemics every now and again, and the birth rate was very, very high. These were the post-war baby boom years, and in the early 60s, the Singapore Maternity Hospital, where I was born, was the most productive maternity hospital in the whole world. So for the government confronted with all this, the first priority was just to get your head above water. And that meant get the population housed, build schools for their kids, have a family planning program so that you get the birth rate under control, have public health services provided, such as standpipes so people could have clean, fresh water to wash and to drink and to cook with, and to have maternal and child health clinics. So the children can be inoculated, the mothers can be advised how to look after them, and we get everybody to a first base level. And that took us a certain distance. But after that, we had to make major steps. In healthcare, one of the things which we got right from the beginning was to say that we'll subsidize you, the state will help you pay, but you have to have a personal responsibility element. It should not be free, you have to co-pay. So one of the first things the government did upon being elected was to start charging for prescriptions. Because otherwise, the patient is given pills, he goes home, he takes it for 2 days, he doesn't feel better, he throws it away, he comes back again, another packet of pills. So we said, you just pay $1, you can afford it, but that means you will take it seriously. And we've kept that principle so that in the healthcare system, we expect people to pay some part towards their costs. Yeah. And we actually, many years later, made a scheme of compulsory health savings. So when you work, some proportion of your income, 6, 7, 8%, depending on your age and your income, goes into a MediSave account.
Right.
You will know what
it is. Yes, absolutely.
It's your personal account. You can use it when you get sick, you go hospital, helps to pay your hospital bills. You can use it if you have cancer, you can have it for chemotherapy or expensive treatments. And it inculcates a sense that this is your money, please spend it carefully. So on the user side, we never gave it away. Yeah. On the supplier side, the government is very much prominently there. We haven't left it just to the private sector. We used to run the government hospitals. They ran like government departments in the old days. They had no idea what it was costing them to run. It wasn't their job to know. Their job was just to treat the patients. Yeah. But if you're running the system, that's not a good arrangement. So we changed them to make them not for-profit outfits, autonomous, self-accounting, not for-profit, but bottom-line conscious. And that way you get efficient health care. At the same time, you are able to control the impulse of for-profit hospital to up the treatment so as to make more money.
Absolutely, Prime Minister. I suppose, Dr. Kim, that the point I'd like to make with you is that Singapore is a unique example. The size and the scale of the nation, it's a small country with a small population. But the whole idea of the Human Capital Index is so that the lessons from countries that have done well can be transplanted elsewhere, in theory, right? So are you seeing the kind of investment that we need around the world to be able to prepare us for the digital future?
Well, frankly, no, and that's exactly why we did this. I mean, I've been a health activist for most of my adult life, and we kept screaming at donors, please, give more, give more, give more. And we went from a couple of $100 million, in the late 1980s, and then we're so grateful for Melinda Gates being here. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation changed everyone's sense of ambition. But then PEPFAR came along, and the Global Fund, and we went from a couple $100 million to more than $20 billion spent on healthcare. But the thing that just overwhelmed me in the last 6 years was, as much as there has been a rise in ODA, there's just no way we're going to solve the problem of 25% of children being stunted in
Right.
the world with calls for more ODA. There's no question we need more foreign assistance. We want everybody to be more generous. But we knew that leaders and ministers of finance would have to take the same kind of interest and responsibility as Prime Minister Lee took, right? And so one thing, I made a joke of it backstage, but you know, the most remarkable thing about Singapore is that this is not a country that was full of crazy rich Asians for the last 100 years, right? This is a country that went from having low literacy rates, you know, very developing country kind of morbidity and mortality numbers, to where it is now, because the leaders took responsibility and
Right.
said, we are going to measure it, we're going to get there, we're going to try all the different innovations. And so what I hope is going to happen, so much of global health and education has been focused on supply.
Yeah.
Donors give more, and input. We put this much, this percentage of GDP. Now we're switching it, I hope, to outcomes and demand.
But
In other words, the leaders, we hope, come to us and demand to know, what does it take to get better outcomes? And of course, the example of Singapore is one that we're going to point to frequently.
And specifically, how will the Human Capital Index, do you think, galvanize people? Is it the ranking that will make them feel like, I've got to get better in the ranking?
Well, unfortunately, you know, there have been so many studies that have shown the relationship between better health and economic growth, between better educational outcomes and economic growth. It's something, you know, education as one of the best investments for economic growth. This has been known for a very long time. But what we're finding is that because there has been such a strong focus on donor generosity, which again I agree with, been such a strong focus that I think some developing country leaders have been hiding behind that and say, yeah, you know, our health outcomes are dependent on whether or not the donors are generous.
Right.
And what we would say is, even without greater donor generosity, right now, if countries committed to collecting taxes, if countries got rid of regressive and not helpful subsidies like fossil fuel and agriculture,
Yeah.
and in the case of the Philippines, they implemented a tobacco tax, the proceeds of which they put into health and education
Right.
kinds of investments. So we know that it's possible. So what we're saying is to countries, look, if you're serious, we'll help you bring in more private sector financing for those things like, you know, infrastructure that we know are commercially viable, and then we'll help you manage your budget, you know, manage your spending in a way that you'll be able to improve dramatically your outcomes, especially if you invest in those things which have been proven to
That will
improve
work.
outcomes.
Absolutely. Now, just looking to the future, though, Prime Minister Lee, you know, so far Singapore has done remarkably well. There's no question about that. But do you feel that the job is done? You know, for the future generation of my children, for instance, in Singapore, how do you continue to invest in human capital? Because, well, the same things keep working.
No, the job is never done, because you reach a new level, there are new expectations, new challenges arise. For example, we've got a reasonably good education system now, but one of the things which we are focusing on is to pay a lot more attention on preschool education.
Excellent.
Because children come at the age of 6 to school at quite different levels. Some able to read, some able to write, some barely able to be literate and recognize the letters at all. And we want to bring everybody to a good starting point as early as possible in life, regardless of whether you are rich or poor, whether your parents are advantaged or disadvantaged. And that's a major area of focus which will take us quite a number of years. With healthcare, we also have to focus on quite a number of things. Hospital treatment is important, but you don't want everything to happen in the hospital. We need to look at step-down care, because particularly with old folks, when they are ill for a long time, but they may not need very high-tech medicine. They just need to be well looked after and be able to convalesce and recuperate. And in the end, and in the community as well. And we have to provide the step-down care facilities, and we have to provide people the incentive to stay healthy and to stay fit and to stay active.
Absolutely.
Active aging. So we've got old folks in their 70s and 80s who are learning to dance ballet. and doing not
Yeah, I've
badly.
seen evidence of that.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and they are much the healthier and happier for it.
Well, I went to Singapore and I specifically asked Prime Minister Lee to be on this panel, and he was very reluctant to because he didn't. But I'll tell you why I asked him, because when I went to Singapore, I spent an entire day studying the healthcare system because I couldn't believe that they were getting the outcomes they were getting
Right.
and spending 4% of GDP. And then Prime Minister Lee corrected me, and he did it again in the backstage. He said,
4.6.
no, it's 4.6%.
That's right.
But, you know, the U.S. spends, what, 19% of GDP? Most of the European countries are 10 to 12%. China's already at 5%. And so to be able to get those kinds of outcomes at 4.6% was just stunning to me. I couldn't believe that was happening. But I think the reason I asked Prime Minister Lee, because every time I talk to him, he gives me this kind of detail. And I think that's what's going to be required.
Right.
Leaders are going to have to get into the details of what works in healthcare, what works in education. And an annual ranking that causes the newspapers to respond and opposition parties to question. This is the level at which we have to have this discussion, because going into the future with 39% of your children stunted with poor educational outcomes is a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely.
And I felt that it was literally the moral and ethical responsibility of the World Bank to reveal this relationship between investing in people and economic growth, so that people couldn't say, well, we didn't know, right? From this day forward, no one can say we didn't know. We are making it clear. If you don't do this, it's not just that you're shortchanging an individual. What you're doing is setting your country up for instability and inability to compete in the future.
So, Prime Minister Lee, on that point, you know, given the fact that Singapore has had such remarkable success, what would your advice be for those in the audience, other finance ministers who want to replicate the success, those of us watching online as well, to be able to replicate Singapore's success story?
Well, I think the first starting point for the government must be that we want to improve lives for all of the population, not just for some of it or for the successful ones, but for all of the population across a wide range. Because if you do that, then as their basic lives improve and they have control over their lives and they have a roof over their heads and they can start thinking about the future and what they want their children to be, then you can talk about public health, then you can talk about improving and optimizing our healthcare system. Then we can talk about having a good education system and the parents are supporting it. And then from that, you have more growth, you have more prosperity, and we can make further progress with our social services. But you have to have that desire to make the benefits go very broadly, and then to have people have an incentive to improve themselves and their children.
And Dr. Kim, your sense of how you think this will be received amongst people, countries who are trying to replicate this success and get further up that ranking?
Well, I have to tell you, there were many, not many, but there were at least a few countries that really didn't want us to do the ranking.
I'm not surprised.
You know, I'm very grateful to my board because the board really was supportive. And they were supportive not because they thought they knew where they were going to come out in the ranking, but I think they agreed. We were able to convince them that the relationship between these investments and economic growth is so clear, and may be one of the most powerful correlations that we know of in terms of what you invest in and what you get later. And in the context of rapidly changing the world of work with technologies, is eliminating some jobs, but also definitely changing the kind of skills required for the jobs that are being created. Because we know all that, the board ended up supporting fully the release of the ranking. And I've said before, I think every World Bank president probably gets one ranking in their tenure. And so this is the one I chose because, again, we've just got to bring everyone's focus on this particular issue because we will fall prey to short-termism and not thinking enough about how critical this is to build the foundations of future growth.
Investing in human capital, it's so apparent that it is the way that countries need to prepare for the digital future. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us for this discussion. It is really a privilege and a pleasure. Thank you, Prime Minister Lee. Such an honor, really an honor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Kim, thank you so much. Thank you. Please. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being such a patient audience and for that scintillating discussion. I'm sure you learned just as much as I did. And for those of you who have real power and the ability to change things in your countries, hopefully we can look forward to a future where more investment is made in the things that actually matter for people. We'll have a short video now while the stage is being reset to show us and bring us the voices of people who represent the reason why we're here today. So please do enjoy the video. Don't go away. We'll be right back with with the rest of the program.
Quiero contar historias con mis dibujos.
Saya pengen jadi produser film.
I want to do science.
Fashion businesswoman.
I want to be an engineer.
To make rehabilitation affordable to as many patients as possible.
Invest in me.
Eso ha sido el cambio en la comunidad y en mi hogar especialmente, ¿no? En ellos está el cambio. Son inteligentes, desde su sueño de ellos es ser líder.
Esos nutrientes de los alimentos que traía con mi abuelita, todos, mi familia, fueron un gran partícipe de mi vida. Pero ahora ya estoy pasando a una siguiente etapa, preuniversitaria, esa formación.
Mereka mempunyai mental atau jiwa wirausaha.
Kita juga diajarkan kewirausahaan.
Motivate kids, teach them how to think about logic.
Karena pendidikan sendiri adalah fundamental bagi anak bangsa untuk nanti mereka memajukan bangsanya.
There's this stereotype, you can't make it or something.
I borrowed some money and I bought a laptop and started programming the website.
No creo que sea un campo solo para varones.
In 6 months, I managed to publish it online.
Pero está en la decisión de uno mismo poder romper esas barreras y realmente involucrarse en tecnología.
Nobody has experience on how that solution needs to be built.
We're forcing them to be creative, to be curious, and to explore. And then we figure it out. It's such a reward. It's so exciting. It's almost like a eureka moment. We can just come up with something really huge.
Estoy saludable.
Belajar untuk mengembangkan kemampuan diri saya.
Puedo trabajar, puedo hacerlo.
Untuk selangkah lebih dekat menggapai mimpi dan cita-cita saya.
Yo quisiera llegar hasta donde ni siquiera aún lo he pensado.
I get to do what I love every day.
Puedo hacer mis sueños.
I'm pretty happy.
Porque en realidad no tengo límites.
It makes my dream and my talent come true.
Invest in me.
Invierte en mí.
Invest in me.
Invest in me.
In me.
Invest in me.
A big round of applause for that video. I think it really goes to show the necessity, the urgent need of communities around the world and how much this kind of work can actually affect the lives of people, young people, like how you saw in that video. Now, the next part of our program, where I would like to call to stage the country leaders who have responded to the World Bank's call to action on investing in human capital. Please join me in welcoming to stage Sri Mulyani Indrawati, the Minister of Finance for Indonesia, Ivan Macha Variane, Minister of Finance for Georgia, Mary Kawar, Minister of Planning and International Cooperation for Jordan, Asad Umar, the Minister of Finance for Pakistan, Teresa Czerwinska, the Minister of Finance for Poland, Zeid Ladari, the Minister of Development, Investment and International Cooperation for Tunisia, Ulana Supran, Minister of Healthcare for Ukraine, and Abraham Tekeste, the Minister of Finance for Ethiopia. Ladies and gentlemen, please do take your seats. Yes, that's fine. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, sir. The ministers all represent countries that have stepped up to take early action on the Human Capital Project, countries that are at the forefront of pioneering national strategic plans to deliver stronger human capital outcomes for their people. They will be providing us with a short glimpse into their plans for the future and their commitments to building human capital for people. I will also be inviting to stage during these presentations renowned global leaders who are championing the human capital agenda in their own ways. Each of these ministers will come up and they will talk to you from this podium, and they will be giving you their presentation, their plans for what to expect from these countries going forward. To start us off, I'd like to invite a minister who needs little introduction, Sri Mulyani Indrawati, the Finance Minister of Indonesia, the host of these annual meetings, and a pioneering leader for programs to invest in the youngest children in their earlier and most critical years. Please join me in welcoming Sri Mulyani Indrawati. Terima kasih, Ibu.
Thank you very much. I would like to first welcome you all here in Bali. I know many of you may be the first time to go and visit Indonesia or Bali. So I do hope that you are going to have a good time, a very productive meeting, as well as good stay here. And I hope this is not going to be the first and the last one for you to come here. Ladies and gentlemen, for this Human Capital Summit, Indonesia has volunteered to become one of the early adopters. This is because we recognize that human capital is very, very important. This is important not only for Indonesia, but also the world. If we look at the global world situation today, in which current global volatility and a threat of full-blown trade war is threatening the progress being made by all countries to achieve Millennium Development Goal, and now we adopt Sustainable Development Goal. We have to stay focused in what is the most important for a country to make a progress. Human capital is very, very important, and the distribution of progress among countries in the world is still continue uneven. And most of them is usually also explained by the quality of human capital. Human capital is the key to reducing poverty and addressing inequality. Global evidence shows that human capital is a key factor which drives economy around the world. Realizing this condition in recent decades, governments around the world have made valuable investment in human capital, which resulted in major gain, such as child mortality is down 50%, 40% fewer children out of primary school, and there is at least one social safety net program in every country. So all this policy bring positive impact. Yet millions of people, including young children, still lack of right nutrition, quality education, early stimulation and learning, as well as necessary skill for job in rapidly digitizing world economy. So health is a very important factor when we talk about quality of human capital. 400 million people still lack access to essential health service globally, and 100 million each year fall into poverty as a result of health-related expenses. Indonesia, President Jokowi is now launching the universal health coverage. We are still at the early stage, and that's why we want to learn how we are going to improve the system. First, in terms of budgeting, is not only the only problem on this health provided for all population, but most importantly is the design. Government, in this case, can put more money, but how we are going to make sure that the service delivery will really reaching to the most needed. Investing in the physical, cognitive, and emotional development of children, especially since pre-birth until they enter primary school, is also very critical. This is critical not only for the current, but most importantly for the future productivity. And at this moment, I think a lot of studies showing that investing at this very critical age is going to improve the productivity of the economy. So for all of us, we recognize the need of the health, nutrition, and intervention at the early age. Most of us is going to ask, and this is especially true also for Indonesia, how we are going to be able to improve from the program that many government has already initiated. The second one in education. Education is very important ingredient for what we call it human capital improvement. Millions of children are still unable to understand even simple sentences or do simple arithmetic even after they finish the primary school. So access is one thing, and many countries has already improved in the access for boys and girls. But then the next question, which is equally or more important now, is the quality, the process of learning and how they are going to be able of using this access of education to become more productive human being. And that's why this human capital project launched by World Bank is very, very important. For me, when I was in the World Bank and then now back to Indonesia and see many of the initiatives by the World Bank to do this human capital project under the very relentless, persistent President Kim insisting that we need to pay attention more and more on the human, I think affecting all of us. I personally is affected by those kind of intimidation by President Kim. When I'm back to Indonesia, I'm becoming more critical and aware about the need, not only to put aside the budget for the human capital development, but more and more curious, critical, and try to be very supportive to all the ministries as well as local government who's responsible to improve the human capital quality in Indonesia, whether this is health, education, and social safety net. So we are now having all those evidence base and many of political will as well as intention and even policy in place. I do hope that this human capital project is going to really create a forceful movement as well as effective improvement in the policy, program, and design for many countries. Because every year we pass, it's going to be a year wasted for younger generation that they deserve to have a better life today and in the future. And that can only be get if we are very serious and effective in delivering human capital investment to them. So with that, I would like to call for you all, and especially I'm glad that this call for action is not only among government policymakers, but we combine with multilateral institutions as well as philanthropists, as well as private sector and CSO. I'm sure if all of us playing our role in a synergetic way, we are going to be able to deliver a better result. So with that, I would like to congratulate President Kim and the World Bank who launched this human capital project, and Indonesia as an early adopter, voluntarily making us as a case. And if the bank, as well as all human capital stakeholders here in the room cannot make Indonesia better, I think you are not going to make any better in any part of the world. Thank you so much and have a very good meeting.
Thank you very much, Sri Mulyani Indrawati. As the minister there pointed out, there's absolutely no time to waste, and investing in human capital, as you pointed out, is really important for developing economies. I would like to invite next to the podium Abraham Tekeste. He's the Minister of Finance for Ethiopia, and this is a country that's paved the way for human capital development with strong investments in social safety and the resilience of its people. Please join me in welcoming Abraham Tekeste.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Investing in people and human capital is very important. Investing in people helps improve the quality of life and empowers people to productively engage in their communities and countries. But investing in people is also very important for countries like Ethiopia who have an ambition of long-term development. Long-term development requires healthier, well-trained, educated citizens. So investing in people is also critical to support the delivery of our long-term development objective. So investing in people has been at the center of our development strategy. There has been very strong political commitment from the government. The government, not just at the center, but all the way to local authorities. So we have a whole government approach to prioritizing investments in human capital at all levels. Communities were also mobilized to support investments in human capital development. These commitments were guided by a medium-term development strategy, which puts human capital at the center. As a result, we were able to invest up to 60% of our budget in people, education, health, and social protection, as well as other essential services that build human capital of citizens. We have been investing so much for the last 15 years consistently. As a result, we have achieved universal access to primary education. We are very close to realizing universal access to primary health care as well. Child mortality has declined substantially. Maternal mortality has declined. Poverty has declined from close to 50% in 1996 to about 24% in 2016. As we started from a very low level of human capital development, challenges remain. Particularly, we are now focusing on quality, improving the quality of education, the quality of health services. We are focusing more also on equity, to ensure equity of health services, education across different sections of societies and geographic areas. And Ethiopia remains committed to further invest in improving quality and equity in human capital as well. Most of the resources we expect to come from the public sector. Investments in people are going to be mainly from the public sector, and we are committed to deliver on these requirements. We will prioritize our domestic resources to go to human capital. Still, the domestic resource would not be sufficient, and we will count on our development partners. The World Bank has been very instrumental in supporting our human capital development programs, and with such support, we aim to make even further progress in human capital. Thank you very much.
Minister Tekeste, impressive statistics there, poverty declining by a great amount there, excellent progress on human capital investments. Now, none of this would be possible, being able to invest in human capital, without people who raise the awareness and raise investment for these worthy causes. So I would like to invite up to stage someone who's long championed these issues on the global stage, in particular mobilizing action and investment for some of the most vulnerable amongst us, especially women and girls. Please join me in welcoming to stage Melinda Gates, the co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
I'm very happy to be here today. And I'd love for each of us to pause for just a minute and think about your own journey to the seat that you sit in today, or whether you're standing in the back of the room. None of us would be here if we didn't have the chance to have great health, and a good education. And I think for any child in the world today, 30 or 40 years from now, they ought to be able to have a seat on this stage, a seat in this room, if that's their aspiration at the global stage, or to be able to fulfill whatever their aspiration in life is. And so that's why I'm so happy to see so many ministers here today discussing the next steps on this very urgent priority. All the work that we do at our foundation is based on optimism, and that is optimism about the future. The reason we're optimistic about the future is because of people. We believe that people want to take action to address the inequities that they see in their own community and in the world. And we want people to know that they have a stunning ability to innovate and to solve the world's problems as they exist today and the problems to come in the future. So to deliver on the promise of the future, we must invest in people, and especially young people. We have to invest in their health because young people need to be able to rely on their bodies and their brains if they're going to be productive and prosper. And we must invest in their education because when healthy young people gain knowledge and skills, they're able to achieve their total full potential. These investments in human capital are essential to the well-being of every individual. And they're also the cornerstone for prosperous communities and prosperous nations. But human capital alone does not guarantee economic growth. There can be no growth without healthy, productive, knowledgeable, and skilled citizens. And likewise, there can be no progress on human capital without a renewed focus on women's health and economic empowerment. We know that investments in women and girls have an outsized impact, and yet there are women and girls all over the world that are still being neglected and left out. So what does a renewed focus look like? Well, it looks like girls who are not only in school, but they're learning in school. It means quality education, because quality education is what triggers that virtuous cycle that then lasts for generations. We know that educated girls are healthier, and we know that their sons and daughters are also healthier and more likely to be well educated. Second, a renewed focus on women's health and economic empowerment looks like more women with the tools and time to space their pregnancies. Because when girls and women get to decide when and if they're going to have children, we know that their families are healthier, better educated, and wealthier. So today, luckily, there's a record 309 million women who have access to contraceptives in emerging economies. But there's still 214 million women in low-income countries that are telling us they want access to contraceptives, but they don't have them. If we really want to trigger that virtuous cycle that I just mentioned, then family planning has to be part of it, because it is linked to the demographic changes that lead to extraordinary economic growth. We've seen it in country after country after country, and it takes just one generation. So third, a renewed focus on women's health and economic empowerment looks like women farmers with access to markets where they can sell their produce. It looks like mothers who can receive government payments in their own digital bank account, which they control. Because when women have money in their hands and the power to decide how to spend it, it improves life for them, and it improves life for everyone around them. So thanks to the World Bank's Human Development Index, led by President Jim Kim, we're off to a great start on gender-sensitive investments in human capital. Most importantly, the index not only ranks countries, but it includes gender disaggregated data from the start. I can't tell you how many pieces of data don't include gender disaggregated data. And without data, we don't make investments on behalf of women and girls. So I want to thank the World Bank for making sure disaggregated data is part of the index. But we know the index itself isn't going to deliver better health and education for young people. It's going to take smart country investments guided by evidence and data. It's going to take more and more efficient spending and learning by countries, donors, and institutions like the World Bank. And most of all, it's going to require leadership. I recently met with President Kenyatta of Kenya, President Kabore earlier this year in Burkina Faso, both of whom told me that they thought about their country's futures in terms of human capital, in terms of the investments they're making in their people. Just a few weeks ago, at the sidelines of the United Nations event, I heard President Macron of France say that health and education, especially for girls, were two of his most important 3 top priorities. At the same event, President Bio of Sierra Leone said that he ran for and won his office on a platform of human capital, and now he's implementing it. So I'm inspired by these examples of leadership from both within developing countries and donor nations, and also global institutions like the World Bank. I look forward to the conversations in the years and months ahead, and that we're going to have today, about how we can all work together to make sure young people have the power to transform our world. I'm super confident that these conversations will lead to partnerships and eventually to concrete actions. Our foundation is eager to contribute in any way that is helpful to this discussion and the investments ahead, so thank you for having us here today.
Thank you so much, Melinda, for that extremely inspiring speech and your thoughts on how we can go ahead in the future investing in human capital. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'd like to call to stage now the Minister of Finance for Poland, Teresa Czerwinska. This is a country that has made some real progress recently on student learning and has valuable lessons to share on how human capital can be used in the right way. Minister of Finance for Poland.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here today and represent my country in this very important initiative. We are well aware in Poland that investments in human capital have a significant positive effect on economic development. It brings clear and substantial benefits for individuals as well as for countries. Empirical evidences, of course, confirms that investment in human capital has generally high rate of return. Countries that significantly develop their educational and healthcare systems are thus enhancing their foundations for economic growth. I would like to underline that human capital development also brings distributional effects. The system of financing of education and healthcare involving public finance, together with access to educational and healthcare services, has an impact on the redistribution of resources so that social inequalities are reduced. Complying with this requirement is instrumental for achieving growth that is more inclusive. Equality of opportunities should be among principles of policies relevant to both sectors. In 2017, the Polish government adopted a new strategy for responsible development. It identifies the development of the knowledge-based economy as one of the key challenges for the long-term country development. The key idea for the development of human capital under the strategy for responsible development are skills of individuals and social groups. The overall goals are expected results are improving the quality of human capital and increasing their share of social capital. The strategy has a horizontal nature of support for human capital by reindustrialization of our economy, development of knowledge, professional competences and digital skills, regional sustainable development, and development of innovative companies, also through facilitating entrepreneur culture at universities. The government in Poland is also pursuing its own human capital development strategy, and its main goal is to develop human capital by extracting the potential of people in such a way that they can participate fully in social and economic developments at all stages of their life. The strategy focuses on 5 specific objectives: increasing the employment, prolonging professional activity and ensuring better quality of life for older people, improving the situation of people and groups at risk of social exclusion, improving people's health and increasing efficiency of healthcare system, and raising the level of competences and qualification of individuals. Development of the human capital is a complex issue, complex solution. So our all-governmental strategic approach helps us steer our policy to achieve better results. These efforts enable us to be such in a high position of the human capital index rating. But still more needs to be done, and we are dedicated to do it. Therefore, a continuation of the sustainable development path and sharing its benefits our society should enable us to even further improve the human capital in Poland.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I'm sure with that commitment that you have outlined, you will move up the rankings next year. So I look forward to that when you come back to the Human Capital Summit or Index next year. Next on the list is Asad Umar. He's the Minister of Finance for Pakistan. As we all know, this is a new government, and it is in the midst of committing to a new strategic future, prioritizing the building of human capital. Asad Umar, the Minister of Finance for Pakistan.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to participate. As you mentioned, we are a new government. We are relatively a new political party as well, brought into governance at the federal level for the first time. And one of the reasons why we've been voted into power, at least that's what we believe, is the fact that our manifesto and the communication of our leader is centered around human development. As Dr. Kim pointed out earlier, obviously countries need infrastructure for development and growth, and you also need to develop your people. So you need both, but it's a question of what do you prioritize and what comes first in your mind. And so it's probably for the first time that a party has been voted into power in Pakistan, which believes that human capital development is absolutely central to the development of the country on a sustainable basis, and places it at the top of its priorities. And that to me is the first step in any change that you want to make. It's the prioritization. And some of the things, as I said, you will find in the manifesto, but the kind of thing which catches people's attention, I've even heard in the last 2 days, people I've met here commenting on it. The first speech of the Prime Minister, he spoke at length about the problem of stunting and how it's limiting the potential of Pakistan and the need to address it. So hopefully this prioritization will be reflected in the investments that we make as we move forward. Obviously, it's just been 7 weeks since we've come in. And obviously, without resources, you cannot make changes. So that's certainly a priority or certainly a prerequisite. But I strongly believe, at least that's been our experience in Pakistan, I assume that would be the case around the world, it's not just the resources, it's how well you use them. And governance, therefore, becomes a key. And even though we've been voted to power for the first time in the center, our party did hold a provincial government. One of the provinces was run by us 5 years back. We voted in power there. And our experience there showed how critical the governance changes are. And I'll mention some of these as I go along. It may seem very rudimentary, very simple to you, but in the case like Pakistan, small changes can have big impacts. Let me talk a little bit about the health area and what we need to do or what we are planning to do in order to improve the outcomes that we are seeing in the health area. Clearly, neither in education nor in health, do we see the outcomes that the people of Pakistan really deserve. In the area of health, one of the principal decisions that we have made is to reprioritize. One is to increase the resources, which has to be done, but even then, obviously, we'll have finite resources at our hand. And we have seen, and that's the reflection of the kind of elite capture of society and policy making that you see in Pakistan, a disproportionately high budget allocation for tertiary healthcare compared to primary healthcare. And as in the Human Capital Index or the World Bank rightly emphasizes, it's those investments in primary healthcare which have the much greater impact on the lives of most of the people, particularly the children who are the future. So that reprioritization is one of the priorities. The other thing that we had done in the province, and now we're rolling it out at a federal level, is a health insurance scheme. We call it an Insaf health card, Insaf being part of the name of the political party that we have. It means justice. And it's a healthcare scheme which has been very effective in not just basically giving the power of decision making into the hands of the consumers. So using the same government budget, but providing it through the demand side rather than the supply side, which is traditionally the way things had been done. And that has a very powerful impact because the consumer then acts as the principal agent of accountability, and it improves performance because if you don't perform, you don't have patients coming in. And I think that's also a major part of the governance reform that needs to be made. Instead of the bureaucrats deciding how much money will go where, if we put more and more money into the hands of the people and the consumers and let them decide, it can have a really positive impact. The other change that on the health side we need to make is there is not enough attention given to nutrition. And we're looking at school nutrition programs. Some have been launched at a limited level, but that's an area that needs to be increased. And the second change of emphasis is moving more towards prevention, moving more towards prevention and immunization programs. Melinda Gates is here. The Gates Foundation has worked very closely with Pakistan with a very, very successful polio program or a polio eradication program. And we are hoping that this year might be the last year in which we have a case of polio in Pakistan. So other immunization programs of similar nature have to be prioritized because they have a very, very strong impact. On the education side, obviously you need more schools. There are a lot of children who are not in school. And in particular in Pakistan, the gender disparity increases tremendously as you go from primary schools to secondary schools. And the reason for that are the social conditions in Pakistan, particularly in the rural areas where girls cannot travel far from home. So there are more primary schools, so the distance from where a girl child resides and the primary school is less than the distance to the secondary school, and therefore the dropout ratio from the primary to the secondary system is much higher amongst girls. So we need to get schools out there, but there is a limit to how many schools you can build with the limited budgets. So we need to leverage technology, and that's a major part of the plans going forward, is to leverage technology so that we are able to go beyond brick and mortar and be able to access and reach children even in remote areas. Pakistan has some of the highest mountains in the world, and then you've got big deserts, so all kinds of logistical challenges, and using technology can really help there. And to help increase access for children. And of course, another part which is related directly to budget allocations is increasing teachers. But quality is important, and that's, I'm very glad to see that built into the Human Capital Index here. It's not just the number of years of schooling, but it's the quality of education that you get there. And again, simple things, as I said, I'd mentioned to you earlier, may seem very rudimentary to you. The teacher attendances in schools, particularly in remote areas, was very poor because the teachers wouldn't turn up or would not turn up frequently. The student attendances fell. And of course, when teachers are not present and students are not coming to school, the quality of education, the learning outcomes are bound to be poor. So simple things like biometric verifications and online verification of teacher attendance resulted in significant increases in teacher attendance And wherever teacher attendance went up, the student attendance went up. And this is a relatively recent work that has been done. And I'm sure we'll see learning outcomes improve as a result. And obviously, many, many more things that need to be done. We look forward to the fact, and I completely agree with the World Bank president, somehow when you put things in an index, there's something in a human being which makes us innately competitive. So when you see yourself lagging in an index, it gives you an impetus to do what you should have been doing otherwise in any case. So hopefully this index will have an impact around the world and we'll all compete harder with each other, not to build more bombs and missiles, but to produce better schools and provide better healthcare for our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Those are worthy, lofty goals, and I really like that spirit of competition, human competition. It's excellent. So I'm sure you'll be climbing up the rankings too. Now let me call to stage a global leader who's championing the human capital agenda, someone whose passionate work to ensure children and youth are at the center of this agenda. She's been inspiration to so many. Henrietta Fore, Executive Director of UNICEF. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, and we want to join the growing chorus of congratulations to Jim Kim as President and the CEO of the World Bank and the Board of the bank for having launched the Human Capital. This is a program and an index that I think we all will consider a turning point in history. So the best way to build tomorrow's human capital is investing in today's children and young people, no matter where they live. A young person today sees a world that is increasingly connected. There are opportunities if we only raise them up to meet their potential. They trust all of us to invest in them, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it is a smart investment. The business case for increasing government investment in children across both the first and second decades of life is crystal clear. Our countries cannot grow and prosper without the power of strong future generations. And young people know that they are not just the future. They work, learn, and contribute to family and community life each and every day. The brain develops in an astonishingly rapid rate during the early years, under 3, making investments in early childhood development critical, as Sri Mulyani pointed out. Giving a child proper health care, nutrition, and stimulation is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to invest in that child's capacity for lifelong learning and productivity. Investments in the second decade of life can sustain a young person's development by ensuring that she has access to quality education and that she remains healthy and safe. A child protected from violence is clearly better positioned to become a productive citizen than one who lives in fear and suffers harm. With the return on investment so high and the downside so low, the decision to invest in our children and young people is clear. A few examples of that return on investment. Every dollar spent on vaccinations in low and middle income countries yields a 16-fold return in averted healthcare costs and lost wages and productivity. For every dollar invested in sanitation, WHO estimates a nearly 6-fold return in lower health costs, increased productivity, and fewer premature deaths, especially for children under 5. And on average, each additional dollar invested in quality early childhood development programs yields a return of $6 to $17. One study of 6 African countries found that every dollar transferred to a household in a cash transfer program generated up to $2.50 in local economic benefits. Every day in Indonesia, 375 girls marry and drop out of school, costing the economy 1.7% of GDP, and it's lost every year. If we keep these girls in school for a full 12 years with quality learning and benefits to the economy, we have a benefit of billions of dollars and a significant return on investment. Each investment in one area of a child's life, her health, for example, supports her development in other areas too, like her education. Investing in human capital across sectors is the best way to achieve sustainable results that will last a lifetime and shape a healthy and resilient population that can support a nation's economic development in the years ahead. UNICEF is ready to lend our expertise, experience, and global reach across 190 countries worldwide to help governments not only make the case for investing in human capital, but to design and implement programs that support this capital across sectors in health, nutrition, water, sanitation, and education. We're working with governments and communities to help children and young people reach their full potential. We're also bringing together partners from all sectors to focus on co-creating new solutions to better support young people and children. For example, a Generation Unlimited partnership launched last month is bringing together partners, including businesses and young people themselves, to identify and scale up new innovations and new solutions to support young people, from digital learning to apprenticeships, work-study programs, and job shadowing opportunities. As global champions of human capital, we must also be global champions of investing in children and young people across both decades, all of us. As a global champion, I'm committed to working with governments to increase the investments and to continue building the joint investment cases that will draw more support to, more resources for, this important cause. Our children and our young people are the best investment that any of us can ever make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was excellent. That was really inspiring, and thank you so much. I think the point that I've heard across all of these speeches today, presentations, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, there's never been a more important time than now to make these sorts of decisions, and it's wonderful that the Human Capital Index allows these countries to do that. Next, I would like to call Mary Kawar, the Minister of Planning and International Cooperation for Jordan, a country that's striving hard to create opportunities for everyone while also facing an unprecedented number of refugees.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to share with you the human capital story of Jordan. We are a very resource-poor country. Our main capital is the people. We have realized this as far back as the 70s and the 80s. In fact, by the late 70s, the school enrollment of girls was equal to boys. And today, they are still performing better. Today, 40% of students who leave school go to higher education. We have very good maternal health. We have very low infant mortality. So when we look at our index, which is 56, it was actually an eye-opener. We did not expect it. We think better of ourselves. So what happened? In 2008, with the global financial crisis, Jordan started taking on debt. This is along many other countries, not just Jordan. By 2012, the Syrian refugee crisis started, and we suddenly had 20% additional population. And Syrian refugees were welcome to use our education and health systems. We had severely stretched services. High indebtedness increased, borders closed, unemployment increased. And yes, inequality increased between those people who can afford, continue having good education and health, and between those who cannot. And this is where the Human Capital Project is fundamental for Jordan, because we want to get back on track while we stay committed to providing the services and hosting our sisters and brothers from Syria. So why is this project very important for us? We see the linkage with economic growth because right now we need to get the economy back on track. We want young Jordanians to have productive lives. We want to ensure that we have equality of opportunity, and it's just the right thing to do, not just for investment for the future. It is the right thing to do for now, because some countries like Jordan, we don't have the time. So, what are we going to do to make this project successful? First of all, Her Majesty Queen Rania of Jordan will be a global champion. So we have the highest political commitment at our country. We will ensure that we have the right governance because we need systems that deliver and deliver quality services. We need to expand partnerships because provision of health and education and social protection and transition to the labor market is not just about the government, it's about the private sector, it's about the civil society who has always been playing a critical role but just not integrated. So we will use a systems approach. We will ensure that we have the right statistics so that we are monitoring our progress and the timeliness and quality of statistics. We are adamant to have transition to productive life and to get economy back on track. And that is why we are very happy to be early adopters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much there, Mary Kawar, Minister of Planning and International Cooperation from Jordan. Next, I would like to call to the podium Ulana Suprun. She's the Minister of Healthcare for Ukraine, a country that's already embarked on comprehensive health reforms and is committed to making these reforms work.
Good afternoon. Many of you are probably wondering why is the Minister of Healthcare of Ukraine here at the World Bank and IMF annual meeting? Well, I came here to tell you the story of two Ukrainians. Katerina. Katerina's a physician and a lecturer from the city of Luhansk who was forced to flee with her daughter after her home city was occupied by Russian troops. When you lose everything in a single moment, you realize one simple truth. A new apartment, a car, or technology can disappear at any moment. The most valuable things to invest in includes health, education, and creative potential, she says today. Internally displaced, Katerina lost access to healthcare and education for her daughter. An old Soviet rule tied her to the place of residence, predetermined her family physician and school. Eliminating this requirement started the transformation of healthcare. Adopting the new law on healthcare in 2017 created a national health insurance that pays for services at both private and public healthcare facilities. Starting in April of 2018, Katerina, along with 19.5 million Ukrainians, or about half our population, now has freely chosen her family doctor. Katerina's daughter lost her friends and her school because of Russia's war. Her friends back home dodge bullets and avoid illegal mines planted by Russian military and their proxies just to get to school. In Kyiv, Katerina's daughter is enrolled in the new Ukrainian school, where she now has access to interactive models of education, creative, friendly environments, emphasizing problem solving and critical thinking rather than memorization and passing standardized exams, although the Soviet feedback found in healthcare is still present at many levels of education. On the other side here, you see Ihor. He dreamed of becoming a vascular surgeon, but circumstances turned him into a family doctor in a Ukrainian village. The roof of the rural ambulatory where he was assigned was littered with holes. The floors and the walls were dilapidated, there was no internet, and apathetic personnel. And during business as usual for about a month, he started painting the gates by himself. His post to Facebook asking for help engaged the entire local community in the restoration. Reaching out and speaking to every single parent in the community, he's changing perceptions about the importance of vaccinations for their children. Now his community has some of the best healthcare outcomes in the region. And Ihor's salary has tripled in the last couple of months as part of the reform process where primary care physicians are now paid on a capitation basis. Ihor emphasizes preventative health care, reminding parents that a new law raises fines for not using seatbelts in child car seats, aiming to reduce childhood mortality rates from trauma. Prime Minister Groisman has prioritized road safety and strengthening emergency medicine with advanced training programs for first responders. His HIV and TB patients receive considerable help from civil society organizations. Handing national procurement of medicines to international organizations like UNDP, UNICEF, and Crown Agents since 2015 has saved the government 40% on pricing, enabling the purchase of more medicines and paying NGOs to provide social services to the most vulnerable populations, giving patients consistent treatment. Ihor practices early detection and treatment of non-communicable diseases like heart disease, asthma, and type 2 diabetes. Since April of 2017, medicines are provided to his patients at no cost through our Accessible Medicines Drug Reimbursement Program. Over 6 million Ukrainians have already benefited from this program. Ihor never says I, he always uses the word we. Everything he's accomplished at his rural clinic is the result of a team effort. Evidence-based, patient-centric primary care reform is facilitating Ukraine's move towards universal health care coverage, which will be in place by 2020. The biggest obstacles to Katerina and Ihor's success remains the Russian military occupation of Crimea and eastern Ukraine and the cultural and informational deception that it brings. The world of finance categorizes healthcare as spending, be it in Ukraine or in any other country, when in fact, it should be in the investment column. Remember, 795 million people don't have enough food to lead a happy and healthy life. This is unacceptable, but investments in the food industry have changed the lives of millions. Currently, half of the world's population of 7.4 billion cannot obtain essential health services. It's time for a paradigm shift. Thank you, Dr. Kim and the World Bank, for bringing to the forefront the needs to develop human capital, for it is truly our greatest asset. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister of Healthcare, Ilona Sopron from Ukraine. Throughout the entire presentation, we've been bringing you stories and thoughts from some of our global champions, the World Bank's global champions on human capital. So let me now invite to the stage Joanne Carter, the Executive Director of Results. She's been a tireless advocate for health, education, and economic opportunities for the poorest. Joanne Carter.
So I stand here representing a global partnership of locally rooted advocacy organizations across 5 continents, including grassroots advocates in all 50 states in the United States. And as a global partnership, we are committed to equitable access to health and nutrition and to ending diseases of poverty. And that's why I'm honored to be with the leaders who are on stage today, the national leaders, and who are in this room and at this meeting. And that's why I'm proud to be a human capital champion. Because health, nutrition, education, social protection are not only the highest impact investments we can make, they are people's rights. And investing ambitiously, effectively, and equitably in people is the only way we're going to achieve the end of extreme poverty. As advocates, we work with allies across civil society to support government leadership and also to hold governments to account on delivering on this, pushing for more resources, for better policies, and for a commitment to equity. We see the new Human Capital Index as a powerful tool that shows us both what's possible and still what's urgently needed. I've been deeply impressed with the nearly 30 countries that have stepped forward, and with those that are on stage today. And please know that we are committed, deeply committed, to work alongside of you and support your leadership, and also to get more countries to make ambitious, smart commitments and make sure that they are delivered. So that next year when we come back together, we will know that more children are being afforded the start in life that they deserve. And to do this, we're going to need to put equity at the heart of our approach. The physical and mental stunting of a quarter of the world's children, it was really inspiring to hear the steps that Pakistan and others are taking on this. The physical and mental stunting of a quarter of the world's children is perhaps the single greatest marker of deprivation and inequity that we have, with lifelong irreparable consequences. And again, we will only end poverty when we address these most basic inequities in children's earliest days. And this means we cannot leave the most marginalized and vulnerable people for last. We need to put them first in our policies and in our investments so that we achieve real equity of outcomes. Quality education for all kids, a healthy start to life for every child, the end of needless preventable deaths, and the end of stunting. All of these are possible, but none of them are guaranteed. And that's where the people in this room and the broader network of civil societies and communities come in, to ensure urgent and ambitious action and bold, smart commitments made, tracked, and delivered to the communities that need them most. Advocates across the world stand ready as partners in this effort. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne Carter, for that global call to action. Next, I'd like to invite Zeid Ladari, the Minister of Development, Investment and International Cooperation for Tunisia. It was the first country that came forward to be part of the Human Capital Project.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the World Bank, President Kim, for this great initiative, and congratulate the early adopters for joining the call for action. Only leaders with vision, ambition, and outstanding commitment for the development of their countries can take such decisions. From this point of view, the experience of Tunisia is very interesting. When the World Bank came to Tunisia, the early 60s, and met our first President Bourguiba, Habib Bourguiba, they asked him what we can do for you. And the immediate answer was a program for education. So the first loan we obtained from the World Bank was dedicated to human capital development, dedicated to education. And at that time, with limited resources and very challenging context and big needs in every field, that decision was a major and strategic decision taken by our government, who allocated at that time the major part of the budget to education. As a Tunisian citizen, coming from an ordinary family, I'm grateful for my leadership at that time, who took such tough decision and sacrificed more urgent issues and matters to finance human capital development. I, as many of my colleagues and friends from my generation, benefited from free and compulsory schools, free and compulsory education, and good quality of education and healthcare services. This example of leadership is not easy to follow. As decision makers, we are constantly under pressure, under high pressure, to address the most urgent matters, to manage scarcity of resources, and to make concrete and tangible results. We are facing people, and especially young people, who are asking and expecting immediate results. So we have to deliver, and we have to deliver immediately. So, in this time when urgencies and short-term oriented approaches, the tyranny of the urgent, like we spoke in the 60s, is everywhere. The question is, who cares about long-term issues? Who cares about long-term challenges? Famous quotation says, in the long run, we are all dead. This kind of investment is very difficult, it's very tough, because it requires courage. And to see the output of such investment, you need almost a generation. And the political life expectancy of leaders is lower than that. The majority of them. So, who cares about human capital development? Who cares about such long-term matters? And the answer here, in this gathering, you, as a Human Capital Development Initiative sponsors and early adopters, you are here to say, we care. Yes, we care about long-term issues, and we care about long-term challenges. Yes, we care about that because we care about brighter humanity future. We care about that because we care about the future of next generations. Yes, we care about the future of hundreds of millions of individuals and young, desperate, disillusioned young people facing every day the threats of radicalization, terrorism, illegal immigration, criminality. This youth deserve a better future. We are here to say that we should invest in them and give them hope again. Yes, we care about them and we care about giving them the skills and qualifications for the labor market, to prepare them to the fourth industrial revolution challenges, to prepare them to succeed, to successfully handle the digital transformation. They need technical skills, they need also soft skills, and learn how to learn by their own and to develop their innovation spirit and entrepreneurship skills. Tunisian government had just adopted this year a revolutionary regulation, Startup Act. Startup Act offering young startuppers and young entrepreneurs the best incentives and the best guarantees to launch their business and to succeed in it. Making Tunisia the best startup-friendly country in the region. Again, Tunisia is ahead of the curve, and Tunisia was the first country, just reminded us, to join the new initiative of the bank. Our President Beji Qaid Essebsi wrote to President Kim earlier this year to express great interest in this initiative and strong commitment to work with the bank on this initiative. Human capital is again a huge challenge for us in Tunisia. For 2 or 3 decades, we unfortunately abandoned this issue, and we have to admit that during the last 2 decades, we had allocated less resources and less interest to that issue. So I'm here to assure you, with our full support as a government, under the leadership of our President and Prime Minister, and our commitment to work harder to succeed together and to make this program a success. I care about human capital also because as a young politician from a young democracy, I strongly believe that investment in education investment in education capital development had led another unexpected output in Tunisia by establishing the foundations of strong foundation for democracy that emerged few decades later. We care about human capital development also because we believe that this investment will bring another results, another output, more social cohesion, more global stability, and more peace within and between societies. This is very much needed in this time, in our current world in which conflicts, wars, violence are growing at very fast pace. Finally, we care about human capital development because it's not only making people smarter or more innovative or more productive or more growth drivers. All of this is important, but because it makes them closer to each other. We are living in this world with smartphones everywhere. We think that with all of this, we can know what is happening in every corner of the world. This morning, some people in Tunisia learned about the earthquake just before I personally realized that there was just a small earthquake here in Tunisia. But paradoxically, all of this is not making people closer to each other. So by investing in people, I hope that we should lead people to better understand each other, to be closer to each other, and to work with each other, and to invest also in each other. This should be the ultimate result and output of this initiative, more prosperous, more smart world, but also more peaceful and stable world. I wish great success for this initiative and good luck for all of you in tackling this human capital challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to call to stage Ivan Machavariani, Minister of Finance for Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. Georgia is a small country, but beautiful country. Also, it has a reputation of strong reformer. That's why we have embraced the initiative of Human Capital Project and became early adopter country. Yes, we have some achievements over the past decade. If you take some metrics, some indicators, probability of survival to age 5 has increased significantly, up to 99%. We have introduced in 2013 the universal health care. On education side, years of schooling have increased significantly up to 12.5 years. But the problems, the challenges related to human capital are much bigger than these improvements. To give you a flavor where Georgia stands on that, on education side, the quality of education and the learning is still low. The medical system, the healthcare system is biased towards hospitals and emergency and less centered on primary healthcare. As President Kim rightly said earlier today, it's not us to become wealthier to address these issues. Opposite, addressing these issues and these problems, which are the main impediment, main barrier to economic growth, will really unleash the potential which human capital contains in itself. And in the end, in order these reforms and this agenda to succeed, and like any initiative, any reform of such scale, we need three things to happen. One is governments in our countries should act as a whole. Societies should act as a whole, and we should have a national level consensus. And international cooperation and coordination is vital to create evidence-based, efficient policies. So the world should act as a whole. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, let me invite our human capital champion, Achim Steiner, Administrator for the UNDP, on to this stage. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to join you here on the occasion of the launch of this Human Capital Index, and I want to begin by saluting Jim Kim and my colleagues at the bank for having had the courage to take that next step in challenging for what has for so long often been a very reductionist way of trying to capture development and progress and prosperity, which is measured largely still around the world with this very crude indicator of GDP and GDP growth. The ability to look at ourselves, at our societies through the lens of how we are investing in our people, in our next generation, and all of you ministers have spoken to that already here this afternoon, is in many respects something that we have all been looking for, and I therefore welcome the Human Capital Index both for challenging that perspective of how we actually look at progress, measure development and success, and also for having included the challenge of publishing an index. And I once said to Jim that in doing so you will find that the first year is fine because everybody will look at the methodology, and then in the second year you will start feeling the pain because as countries react when they move down the list in the index, they will sometimes not be so happy. But that is the role of international institutions, I think, to be able with good empirical analysis and data to allow citizens in a country and the global community to judge whether progress is being made. Let me also share with you that I join you here this afternoon after a week that is not atypical for many who will be in this room here. Traveling, in my case, from the northeast of Nigeria through Chad to Singapore and now here to join you at the annual meetings. And if we talk about human capital and we talk about education and health, then my journey of just 6-7 days took me from one extreme to another. In the northeast of Nigeria, literally seeing what it means when you have lost everything. As a consequence of extremism and violence and Boko Haram attacks, we visited together with my colleague, the Emergency Relief Coordinator of the UN, Mark Lowcock, a camp for internally displaced people. We spent an hour in the reception center where people first arrive after they have had to flee, literally losing everything. Nothing but their clothes on their body, not having eaten for sometimes days. They come with their children, and the first thing that they are given is protection, but secondly, a medical exam. Children are weighed, they are vaccinated. The beginnings of a healthcare safety net is available at that moment. And this is the extreme end. But also Nigeria itself is still looking at how to invest in human capital, and the national story is also one that many Nigerians will look to this Human Capital Index and debate. And in Chad, we spent an afternoon in a new ward in the hospital for mothers with malnourished children. And again, surprising perhaps, the comments by doctors who explained to us that malnourishment is not often understood to be something that is not a disease. So for many mothers, because so little illiteracy, so little awareness and information, it's not just the absence of food. Malnourishment is the product of a number of factors, and these mothers were nearly losing their children. Thankfully, this ward, one of the few in the country that is now available, was harboring literally dozens of women who came in with their children, not only leaving in a few days' time stabilized, but also better informed and aware about how to deal with the issue of nutrition that was mentioned here. And then arriving in Singapore and seeing a nation that has invested in human capital and, as the index also shows, very successfully over years, one of the highest life expectancies, one of the best educated workforce in the world, and speaking and being a testimony to the success of taking human capital seriously. Let me end by saying that in the work that we do in the field of development, and particularly as a champion, and I was delighted to accept this role when Jim asked me, because in the context of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, health and education are fundamentals. But importantly, they are embedded in a larger understanding of shifting our economies, societies, and nations towards a sustainable development path. The opportunity to invest in health and education, if designed properly and with the logic of the SDGs in the backdrop, can yield multiple returns on investment in many other areas. And that is the commitment also with which I accepted to be a champion for human capital and to work together with my colleagues in the bank and with many of the countries that we jointly serve to put the focus on this extraordinary win-win proposition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to all of the ministers who have shared their thoughts with us today, and thank you to all the human capital champions. It's now up to us. Lobby your governments. Tell them you want them to invest in healthcare and education and push that ranking up higher for next year. Thank you very much. I'm Karishma Vaswani from the BBC. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was excellent. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to meet you.